Good evening, Detroit Lakes. This is Vikings Territory Breakdown for the glorious day of Wednesday, the 6th of January, 2021. Happy New Year to everybody to the north of where I am and where Mr. Joe Oberly is, and to, I would say, the far east of where Coach Tice is. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of VikingsTerritory.com. Its sister site, PurplePTSD.com, a new Minnesota wild site called MiniIce.com, and about Baker's dozen other websites coming within the next couple months. May have overextended myself. Speaking of overextending oneself, I was trying to make a reference to your knee, but I couldn't figure it out. I am here, as always, with Mr. Joseph Oberly. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Joe, we didn't get the result we wanted this year. Things didn't end the way we wanted to, but I mean, we accept it. We move on and we try to work better for next time. And we don't storm the Capitol. We don't break stuff. We don't try to tear things down as a result. And I wish that sentiment would extend past the world of sports and into the political realm, because right now what's going on in this country, at least out in Washington D.C., is just horrendous, deplorable, and just it's just bad. Uh, it's terrible to see, and we have to go in the other direction, not this. This is getting worse, and the insider in chief is finally getting what he wants. Fireworks as he leaves office, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of
So that's
references
how I'm sorry.
I'm thinking of Nero a little bit right now, except for he'd be playing the banjo, not something as sophisticated as a fiddle. It's stuff, and I told you this before the show that I was a one of my degrees from the U of M was political science, and I was talking to one of our Vikings insiders for VikingsTerritory.com last night, Dustin Baker, and he and I kind of hit it off. We talked about work stuff, but we've never like actually had a long conversation because we do everything remotely. And he said, "Would you ever have any interest in doing like a political, leaning type podcast that was completely separate from football?" Then you kind of mixed the two because he was also a political science major, and I said that's one thing that rivals my love of football, and B, I thought was a great education because I could look at things in history books and say, man, I got really lucky to grow up in the 90s, and you know, even this was after September 11th, but even then it was you felt like everything was still some semblance of the glowing whatever, the glowing pile on the hill or whatever, the glistening city in the sky. Um, and like I told you, this is stuff that it isn't just like, oh yeah, I read about that's what the Bolsheviks did or something. You know what I mean? It's unprecedented. It would be a bad movie if it was like, yeah, that's so unrealistic. That would never happen. I mean, even a small note. I think I maybe mentioned this on one of the shows we did recently. The movie Contagion, where Jude Law's like this Alex Jones figure who goes around um, trying to sell this. Basically herb snake oil situation, and he said it's the real cure, and everyone's dying. It's this horrible disease, and I remember watching that when it came out in 2011, I think 2012, and saying, man, this movie's great, but that's just super unrealistic. Like people wouldn't react that way. They underestimated it. Like it just I cannot believe what we're seeing, and we have a pretty standard let's talk about football, talk about the Vikings thing of what we're gonna do for the rest of the show. But sometimes you have to step back and say, am I really talking about the Viking special teams as I'm watching democracy hang by a thread? It's genuinely scary, and it is every other descriptor that you used.
Yeah, I don't want to be trite about it, but it's happening right now as we're recording this. So I think we're both a little affected by it. But we should go to the toy department and start talking about football and
Well,
something
I
that's
don't want to correct you
not
either,
serious.
but I was planning on storming TCO.
Wow,
Um,
shoot.
there needs to be some changes. I want to play left guard next season. Um,
I think that's an improvement.
I was so close. Okay, so before the season, and I've maybe posted this 4 times in the lead up to the Lions finale. I predicted the Vikings to go 6-10 this year, and I thought they had a really good shot of doing it. Obviously, they had a really, I don't know what to make. I mean, there was nothing to play
And you
for.
wrote a story reminding us that you predicted 6-10. So that was the death knell right there that the Vikings were going to win. Thank you, Joe.
I jinxed it. But I really did hyperlink that story like 6 times this week. I yeah I don't know what to make of that game because it wasn't obviously there wasn't a lot to play for outside of some of these guys wanting to, maybe hold on to jobs next year on the defense or something, which we'll talk about in a second as well. But it, the defensive performance felt very Pro Bowl-y to me. It was just there was no defense in that game whatsoever. I mean, Cousins had a really
No.
great game. Stafford did. I mean, uh, Alexander Madison had a big game. It was
You
just,
mean Kirk Cousins, the NFC Offensive Player of the Week? Oh
ooh.
my goodness! How do they give that to him after in a meaningless game like that, which in fact you just described as nobody playing defense? I said that to my brothers were texting in the first quarter. Says, "Any gonna play defense here? You know what's
Was
going
he
on?"
NFC Player of the Week? Did I miss that?
NFC Offensive Player of the Week. Yeah,
That's the
Kirk.
second time I think in a month for him. Um, cut him.
But I'll I'll give it to him earlier in the year, but this was a preseason game.
Yeah,
This was a preseason game. It had all the earmarks of it, and at times it was even wafting into Pro Bowl game territory because
yeah,
nobody wanted to even try to tackle. They all just wanted to get not injured, and so it was entertaining. I'm not going to say that if you like to watch points, but it was, it was bad, and Stafford, even when he looked good at times, looked bad. Threw
yeah,
threw a couple bad interceptions, and Kirk did well. The only thing I wanted out of that game I got, and that was Justin Jefferson setting the rookie record, the modern
yeah,
day rookie record for
yeah,
yards in a season. I think it was yards in a
yep,
season by a rookie,
yeah.
and so that was nice. But other than that, I kind of wanted them to lose. I would have liked. I think the Vikings need as low pick as possible, and
I agree with
they
you.
could have probably helped themselves out a little bit. But you knew that they weren't gonna wasn't gonna happen. Zimmer doesn't like to lose, and you can. I mean, I think a win for a coach deludes yourself into thinking,
Oh, finish with a
okay,
high note.
right,
Yeah,
right. But the
yeah.
problem is, Joe, when we look back at this, we're going to look at this season as 7-9, and we're not going to, talk about this last game, one way or other. So if it was 6-10, I mean, 6-10 looks a hell of a lot worse than 7-9 for
It
some
does.
strange reason, but
Well,
it does. So
there's the double digits, and then also for Zimmer, the worst record he has had as a Vikings head coach is 7-9, which is his rookie year. And so I think he wanted to stay, um, you know,
yeah,
afloat. But yeah, I think that you're right. There's one story that I haven't hyperlinked it a lot to, and that was, or should I say, there were stories I haven't hyperlinked to really since the bye week, especially. But my post-draft bemoaning of drafting Justin Jefferson, which I will forever eat crow. That surpasses my mobile Adam Thielen take from a couple years ago, which I will not define or add context to, but I think you
I'm
get the
not sure
general
it
idea.
does. I'm not sure it does. I get to ask you one question though, and I've been, it's been burning me since about midseason, and you've started eating your crow a long time ago, so I'll let people know that. But do you finally now, with your Padre, give up the notion that the SEC can put out some wide receivers and they can put out some players that can play in this league and play for the Vikings, or does it still all have to be all Big Ten all the
Um, that's a loaded question. I would say
time?
broken clock is right twice a day. Um, I would say no. I mean, I don't think every SEC player is by default not going to work out. I just think there's a I think Big Ten players make better pros. But that's really especially a position-based bias. I think quarterbacks. The ESPN just ranked all the Power Five conferences in terms of not quantity of players, but quality position by position. And the Big Ten won because of their, yeah, this was a couple years ago, the article, but they're talking about Tom Brady, Drew Brees, um, who else am I? Russell Wilson, stuff like that. But the offensive line is really the kicker for me, and Penn State has good linebackers and stuff. There's some good Ohio State always has good
It's
edges,
only
but
one good Big Ten team. That's Ohio State and kind of Wisconsin. The rest are terrible.
the Gophers just they were just
Mm.
getting their confidence. Um, Classic Minnesota sports though, because I finally was like, you know what, I'm gonna get back into Gopher football. It's been too long. I was all amped for the season, and it just was like, ugh. But I think there's been a lot written about Wyatt Davis coming to Minnesota with the
Right.
14th overall pick, and I think
That'd be
that would be
great.
really, really good. I mean, he could
I'm
be
with you on
a,
that one.
a
Yep.
Hutchinson level guy, plug and play. Then we don't have to talk about it anymore. Won't that be great if we didn't have to
Oh
talk
yeah,
about
we
the
would.
offensive line?
We would talk about it because he'd be doing well, and he's from the Big Ten, and you remind us every show.
I'd be
Uh,
hyperlinking that every day. I am so transparent. But yeah, I think you're right. The other, I mean, again, the crow eating part of the show is obviously Justin Jefferson. His rookie year,
what a season! Ah,
it's astounding what he's been
yeah.
able to do. And I don't know if it's just me from an eye test standpoint, but I think it's because he's really lanky, like long-limbed, but he doesn't look like he's that fast really, or that he's really running the most precise routes because his arms are or his legs are kind of really long, like
Hmm.
Gumby-ish. Um, but he's just tremendous at every aspect of the position. Uh,
Yes.
the main concern for me was how he would handle getting bumped off the line because he never really did
Hmm.
that senior season at LSU. Um, that hasn't phased them. Short, intermediate, across the middle passes, yards after the catch, leaping ability, body control. I don't think it's entirely hyperbolic to compare him to Randy Moss. Everyone just points to the touchdowns and Randy was a burner and so on and so forth. But he deserves credit also because he hasn't been getting those, Moss-esque 75-yard touchdowns, but
Right.
he's still averaging 20 for a long streak, 25 yards a catch, stuff like that.
He's checked a lot of boxes. I think the thing that surprised me was um, the route running. That right out of the gate, he just dove into it and became a student of the game and had a nice teacher in Adam Thielen. I
Yeah,
should say mentor, and did what he was supposed to be doing. And he did great in contested catches. He did great on sideline catches. Um, he did things outside the slot, which he wasn't supposed to coming in. At least that was the rap on him.
that's why
I
he
will
struggled the first 2 weeks too. Is I think
right,
they had primarily just had him lined up there.
yeah, and the thing I will say he's got to get better at because it's going to be his life going forward is double coverage and what he's going to do with that. He's not the strongest or biggest guy. He's
Yep,
tall, but kind of skinny, and not as skinny as Diggs. And route running can especially when you're one on one can get you open, but when you're double cover, they're rolling somebody over on you. It's not going to be so easily to get open every time that uh, uh, Kirk Cousins can just throw the ball to you, and that's the difference between him and Moss. You could just throw the ball to Moss, and he's going to get it, and you
when he
knew it
put his
was. I
arm up,
mean,
it was the best.
yeah, even before that, you just he's got one on one, it's going to him. I don't care what Moss is going to get most of those, and maybe we'll start feeling confidence about Jefferson in that regard in time. I'm not there yet, but as the season wore on, I was getting there. I was, my son, I was watching a football game with this weekend. He goes, just throw him the ball. Just throw him the because he says he's going to get it. And
Yeah,
to be honest, he did,
yeah,
So I want to see him next year when he gets a heck of a lot more double coverage. And,
yeah.
and Adam Thielen might be the guy you look at if you're picking fantasy players
All he
because,
does is catch touchdowns.
exactly. And he's going to get a little less attention if Jefferson's going to be as crazy good as he was this year. It's just wonderful. And I mean, you said this I think a couple weeks ago about you're remarking how the Vikings have always got all these uh, just these superb players. I mean, Moss,
Yeah,
Adrian
we're
Peterson.
we're really
Uh,
spoiled that way.
yes,
Strangely.
we kind of are. And I guess it's the other side of the coin for never getting these really superb offensive linemen because we get
or
these position
quarterbacks.
players that are just yeah, and quarterbacks who are out of this world and tease us every year to that the Vikings win a bunch of games, and then when the playoff time comes they don't have the trench control to get us over the hump. But
Yeah.
boy, in the meantime, they're sure fun to watch, aren't they?
Yeah, I think you do bring up a good point though. I think it was maybe the Bucks game where it felt like, especially in the first half, Jefferson was a little stifled by the double coverage. He
Yep,
looked frustrated by it. He still got his numbers at the end of the day, but you could tell there was a market difference.
garbage,
You know, uh,
garbage time though, wasn't it? Wasn't that? Didn't we get kind of blown out that game? That one
yeah,
was over quick, I think.
yeah. I mean,
Anyway, go
we
ahead.
had that
Make
amazing time of possession, and then we didn't score any points. Um, it's like the worst of both worlds. But I think, Jefferson, you know, I was 13 when Moss came here, but I vividly remember the era of television blackouts. And if you didn't basically sell out the stadium, then you couldn't watch it on TV. And when Moss came here, all of a sudden, every game was completely a sellout, and Red McCombs was making money hand over fist. Ugh.
well, then you
I'll,
should trade him, Red. You should trade him. Get rid
Yeah,
of him.
I know, God. And I, I'm not saying Jefferson has had that impact, but I think he's really, helped the Vikings, at least from a narrative standpoint, with the fan base, say this guy really opened up or reopened the championship window sooner than we otherwise expected, even though some people were
Hmm.
really kind of overlooking the impact of this retooling on defense last offseason. I think that it changes a lot of things. I think it changes the fact that the Vikings might not want to go, quarterback first round next season, as many thought they might earlier in the year, because you're not going to get, the third or fourth, maybe the third or fourth quarterback at 14, maybe not. Especially uh, considering how what's his name Fields is playing, Ohio State guy. But
No, they're too far down, Joe, to grab a quarterback there. I think you got to go the best offensive lineman at that spot.
yeah, and I think that's a testament to Jefferson, right? I think they're saying this offense can win right now. It's got all the tools needed outside of that line. Look at
Mhm.
even what Tyler Conklin's been able to do. Irv Smith Jr. emerged. I mean, Chad Beebe's had some actual catches and touchdowns in the regular season. That's like a sign of the apocalypse. Um, so yeah, I think
Yeah.
that he deserves all the plaudits that he's getting. Outside of, it's just weird when people compare guys, because Moss was just, again, he changed the game.
Yep. He absolutely did. It's and unfortunately, just to piggy tail off a point you made, about uh, unfortunately, I heard a quote from Zimmer the other day that he sure is interested in getting some defensive linemen in
Yeah.
there, and it made me shake and shudder just a little bit. While I think that's pick number 1A or 1B.
Yep.
1A is offensive lineman and Wyatt Davis and getting him in here and just getting an anchor for that line because you've got another great player I didn't even mention when we were talking about these great players is Dalvin Cook. I mean,
Yeah.
he's as good as there is in the game, and
Yeah.
so he's moving into his prime, and you want to be able to have another season for him where he's you know might not be injured and just going crazy. He finished second in rushing yards
Yeah.
and it was up there in touchdowns, rushing touchdowns. I think
And he
he
missed two
top six
games.
exactly. And so um, I know they need defensive linemen. What we saw this year on the defense, that's position number one on the defense is a defensive lineman, if not an end another end first. But I mean, you got Hunter coming back. You hopefully get something out of Michael Pierce. You've got then you got your three tech that you got to worry. You need someone there,
Yeah.
real starting quality, and then you need another defensive end. That for sure is a huge need. And uh, but you still got to get this offensive line figured out. And hopefully they'll sign somebody. What did you think about all the talk this week about? I saw some tweets after the game where Everson Griffin kept retweeting everybody saying that they wanted him back here. So is he signaling that he wants to return?
Yeah, I was
And
actually working on an article about that, and I think that the more that they can financially with free agents, if it works out, limit the amount of draft day needs on that defense, I think the better off they'll be. Um,
Agreed, but he left because of looking for more money, and he didn't have a very good season. I mean,
I
he
think
went to the
that's
Cowboys, and he ended up with the
yeah.
Lions, and so I don't know. I'm not sure if I want him back, if they can get somebody better. Just it might cost him a little bit.
Well, some people are really high on DJ Wanham.
Yeah, yeah.
I would feel bad for you as your friend, knowing what it would be like if Wyatt Davis was available at 14 and we didn't take him. You would
He-
never hear the end
he-
of it.
oh,
There would be a class action lawsuit. Speaking of storming TCO,
we'd have a whole new podcast where Joe. So why the Vikings didn't draft Wyatt Davis podcast.
a
And
deep
this
dive.
week on the Wyatt Davis podcast, why we didn't draft him. Here we go.
It's
So yeah,
there's a lot of content there. We could, do each week a different year of his going to school, and it would be great. Um, yeah, I mean, I just think that I really do think the through line of everyone who finds every way possible to blame Cousins for everything. I'm sure there's people saying Cousins is it's his fault that this is happening at the Capitol in D.C. It always seems that the one consistent between the different camps as to why Cousins is
he used
bad.
to play for Washington. He used to play for
That's
Washington.
true. He has ooh,
So
that's an
we
article.
can't discount it, Joe. We can't discount it.
I read it online too, so that means it has to be true. Um, the one through line that everyone, when they're bemoaning Cousins, that it always ends up coming down to is his paycheck, right? And so I don't
Yeah.
bring, I've written articles about, these metrics, what his output it would cost financially versus what he's getting paid. He's always overperformed that amount, depending on which metric you use. I know you can use stats to prove anything, but the only time I bring up really the money aspect of Cousins' deal, as a probably the most prominent Cousins quote unquote apologist, is that it is a little infuriating that they uh, changed the way contracts were done in the NFL to land Cousins. They knew at the time that he wasn't the best under pressure, or feeling pressure, sensing it, especially from the blind side, obviously. And they really did nothing to mitigate that. And when we had our show with Luke Braun, the one time that he and I actually kind of raised our voices at one another was about Cousins, and this was before free agency or was over and before the draft, and I was under every impression that they were going to, replace Berger, do something instead of maybe signing Sheldon Richardson to, that 1 year massive rental fee. They could have put together some semblance of interior protection. But I will say that, I'm more optimistic about the offensive line now than, well, I shouldn't say it that way. I was, okay, but I've been talking to a myriad of former Vikings offensive linemen, and NFL offensive linemen, and I've done some private film breakdown stuff. Uh, Looking at Garrett Bradbury, Brian O'Neill, so on and so forth. And one of the most interesting quotes therein was essentially that, and I'm paraphrasing, that everybody on the line seems to have their own technique. It's as if they're all handed a piece of paper and told go figure it out. The 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 amount of in Bradbury's game, he seems like he's on an island. He gets lost a lot. His technique is really bad. There's just a myriad of issues that to this former player, for him or for O'Neal, um, or Dakota Dozier. These are coachable things, right? And the Vikings, it's not as if they have Rick Dennison and they brought in Phil Rauscher from Washington. Um, I can't imagine that's actually what's going on, but that's the impression I've gotten from that person and
Hmm.
a few other people. And I think it's a little bit by design. There's people will have to read the article once it's done, but there's a lot of animus towards the offensive line, from Zimmer, and
Hmm.
there was a player who would in training camp, you know, a veteran kind of spot. Okay, this is what they're doing, and change the offense based on that. And then Zimmer would chew him out and then make him go back to the base offense just so his defense would win in that instance, I guess. Um, just very
Yeah, I'd like to. Is that for
strange
real?
things.
I've heard that, but I don't know if that's fake
Well,
news or what. But
well, the
that
person
seems a little bizarre.
the person that I heard the most of that from, would say is triple A rated, trustworthy guy.
Hmm,
And then also there was that stuff in that article by the guy from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel that kind of talked about stuff like that, like
yeah.
doing RPO and
Well, you think the only
getting mad
reason
about
you
it.
would do that is to give your offensive line confidence when they're struggling, and I don't know that Zimmer's ever been the kind of guy to to, to do something like that. He'd chew you out first before he'd ever let's pat you on the back and make a fake scenario so you can feel better about yourself. That just doesn't sound like
It d-
Zimmer to me, but
it doesn't,
I
but
don't
give it time. Maybe year 15 he'll get to it. No, it is very interesting. But I do think that if we're looking back at 2020 and things to be maybe hopeful for, there is talent on this line. Saving for the left guard spot. I I saw Brian O'Neill's looking for a contract extension. He said he would be willing to move to the left tackle spot, which I am not a fan of. I don't think you are either. Are you? Um,
Well, I haven't seen it been worked to great advantage in the past, so I don't know. He's really talented, and I was bullish on him from the minute I interviewed him on his first year. I just saw something in his eye. I said that I thought that was gonna. This guy's got something here. And I don't want to mess with it, but if he's that talented as said, hey, he is, and he did get beat a couple times on Sunday, by the way. But uh, I don't know that I'd want to do it, Joe. To be perfectly honest, but I don't know enough about the game. I've talked to some linemen about your footwork's got to be completely opposite. It takes some while to make that adjustment, and I was talking to the guy from Slippery Rock. What was his name? Brandon Fusco about
yeah,
that. They had moved him, and he struggled from the point that they moved him over to the right side or whatever, and he had to or the left side or whatever they did, and he was gone after that. But so I don't know. Um, if he's your best player and he's willing to do it and he's willing to work at it and make that adjustment, I think maybe that's the way to go. But um, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine if that's the right thing to do.
yeah. I just feel like Riley Reef's got some gas left in the tank.
But he's going to need a lot more money to fuel it because he had a good year this year. So he's going to go back and say, "Okay, boys, my turn
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
I took you from
Because
the Sharks
I
for you."
mean, they almost, to be completely honest, they almost came into the season without him, which
Exactly.
is incredibly strange. I think that lends itself to some of the not to keep harping on this point, but the team building philosophy of Zimmer via the offensive line. It just feels like whenever they have some semblance of depth or encouragement, they get rid of it. I don't
Hmm.
understand why you would get rid of Pat Elflein just to pay him dead cap money. Like, why not keep him around? Maybe things would have been different when Ezra Cleveland got injured, for example, in a very pivotal game. I know it was more of a personality thing, but Alex Boone is another example of that. He was overweight and people didn't like him. But a year before, they were all singing his praises because they loved his sardonic, cutthroat attitude. They said that's what, Sperano was a big mauler guy. He always wanted these maulers, whatever that means.
Do
Um,
you, Joe, think that just putting in a left guard, and I think Wyatt Davis is a right guard, but he has played some left.
yeah.
Do you think getting a left guard solidifies that line? You got O'Neal on the right side. You've got Ezra Cleveland, who was very good, except not so good in the pass protection. Great road grader. Bradbury, who I'm still okay with, and you put in Wyatt Davis, and then you pay Reef a little money to stick around, and then go looking for a left tackle in the following draft. I don't know. Do you think that's good enough to make a step forward for this line? I think it might be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you'd have to think so. I mean, most of these guys are grading in the 70s on PFF after the bye, which, we've talked about PFF former players and with Coach Tice. Speaking of which, I probably should have mentioned he is at a scheduling conflict this week, so that's why Coach Tice isn't here. I'm sure people are like, "This is the longest intro to Tice ever." Um, we like to. It's as J.J. Abrams, the director, calls it, a mystery box. Um,
No,
I
I was just trying to get more airtime, but Tice was hogging it all last few weeks. So he's
um,
still waiting to talk.
yeah, I I can't imagine it wouldn't be an improvement, just with Dakota Dozier being the one liability on the line. The reason that I'm a little hesitant though is because we don't really know what's going to happen with Kubiak, and I would
He's
assume
gone.
they would maybe keep, if someone is willing on that staff, Clint Kubiak or Rick Dennison even, to kind of stay and keep the zone blocking scheme that they've been building for the last couple
Mm-hmm.
seasons. But who knows?
Well,
I mean,
you got it right because
you
you've
have to.
drafted for it. Yeah,
Exactly, and I mean, Wyatt Davis is a good zone blocker apparently. Um,
exactly.
but I think that yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty now with the Kubiak move, and all of everyone was writing that it was a done deal. And then late last night, there was an article, I think, in the Strib, where Zimmer came out and said that it was a day-to-day decision, and he's, looking at his health versus this or that. But that's monumental. I'm sure some people will applaud the move, and Kubiak got a lot of guff for being too conservative with all the talent that we've established on this episode. Um, that this offense has, and I don't necessarily think that's a Kubiak thing. I mean, if you look at every year he's been an offensive coordinator or head coach calling offensive plays, there's a certain ratio of pass plays to run plays pretty consistently, especially after some of the rule changes
I thought he
in the
had a
mid
good
aughts.
Joe. I thought he had a good season calling plays. I mean, when they scored 27 points a game, and you know, I mean, just not too long ago, we were just wishing all they had to do was score 21 points a game to get a win
Yeah,
with our
that
defense.
was literally the
So
narrative. It was
exactly,
you
and
get
so
21 points.
I
I agree. I agree with you that I think he
I'm
had
bummed
a
that
good season. I do
I
think
think he's
he.
gone, and
Oh,
I'm
me too.
disappointed about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wrote an article like 2 days before that, because he was basically talking about his friendship with Zimmer, and that's why he's here, and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden, it's like, what? Um, but I give him credit for this season. I think that he was more conservative than he otherwise would have been. Not so conservative that he would storm the Capitol building. Ooh, that was a good callback. But eh, that doesn't mean I think people are have cherry picking reasons to be angry because a lot of the time they against some of the better teams like Seattle, they wanted to have these long, slow, methodical drives to keep the offense off the field, right? I mean, that's what we talked about
Hmm.
with the Tampa game. They had that, but they weren't converting touchdowns, so they had all this time of possession, but they you know trailed. Um, and so you have to look at that and say, well, okay, because the defense was young and unproven, Kubiak wanted to have these 10 play drives that take 8 minutes, and they did that in a few games, and it helped. And I think that's also a testament to Cousins because you have to be incredibly efficient then, uh, as this offense was for the most part outside of that Bucks game when they did that. Being asked to pick up yards, but not too many yards, so on and so forth. You know what I mean? Like, was it Tice
Yep.
that broke down the Vikings didn't really have any plays of 40 plus yards, but they had the most for like 25-yard plays?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
that
He was saying that
that's
last week. Yeah.
that's all. That's basically all a testament to the lack of trust in the defense, but then also how well Kubiak called these games. Cousins directed them along with Dalvin Cook, so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's a shame. You know, if what's his name? Kubiak goes, and that's be Cousins' fifth new OC here since he's been here. And speaking of the other Big Ten elephant in the room, Kirk Cousins was on your agenda, and you touched a little bit about him. I thought he had a good season. I know I talked to you uh, on the show more than once that I thought early on he benefited from a lot of some garbage time for his stats, which ended up being very very good, and I think he tied his own career high for touchdowns at 35, and didn't have a whole lot of interceptions, had a few fumbles, but um,
Well, it's
you know
astounding really
I
quickly because he was at the bye. He had 11 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and then he ended the season I think with 35 and 13. So
Wow, it's pretty good.
yeah,
Um, I saw an article headline the other day, and I didn't read it. I'm ashamed to say, since I'm a writer, so I shouldn't be saying that. But it said uh, Cousins, he is who we thought he is, and I really kind of agree with that. I mean, he hasn't changed in my mind this season who I've thought he was. I've gone back and forth on him a lot since he's been here. I've been run hot and cold. Sometimes I thought he was just fantastic. Other times I thought, my goodness, what is this guy doing? He's an 8-year veteran in the league, and we've been over and over on his value and his the things he struggles with. And you mentioned a few of them, and I still feel that way about him. He's just not never exudes that confidence in me that if the Vikings need him in a really huge game in the playoffs, that he's going to get us over the hump to get to the next round of the playoffs. He's a really good. He's a great accurate thrower downfield. He reads defense as well. He needs too much time to do that sometimes, in my estimation. He comes back, turns around, fades back, turns around, looks around, and boom, they're right on top of him. He needs to, start making his decisions quicker. I don't have the same confidence I feel like I see when I look across the border at uh, Aaron Rodgers, who just fades back, looks, boom, balls out, gone, or whatever. I don't see that with Cousins, and I think that's something he's never going to have completely. But I see him as a lot. I'd rather have him than a number of quarterbacks in this league. And I think I agree with you that let's go get that lineman, make it even better for him back there, and draft a quarterback, a little bit later in the draft that they can potentially develop. Uh, he is who he thought he is. He'd have to prove it to me if he's gonna win a Super Bowl for him. But if they get the defense back to where we hope they will next year, and they keep this offense intact, and they've got a good play caller back here, they should be back in the playoffs and have a chance to do it. But I'm not sure if your Big Ten buddy's going to get her done for us. That's all I'll say.
yeah, it's yeah, it's hard because I also want people are some of the external candidates for the OC position that people are pointing to are a lot of also rans, like people who
I
have been
like
around the
Lynn from Chargers, but go ahead.
yeah. I just don't want Marvin Lewis or like a guy who has
No,
been, you know what I mean? Like he had a
no.
long stretch, one of the longer ones as a head coach, but some of these guys like Wade Phillips that they keep coming back. Norv Turner's a great example of that. Some people have said bring back Pat Shermer. Um, I'm a little I like that more than others, but you have to wonder how attractive this job really is when you think it would be, considering all of the pieces on that
Mm-hmm.
offense. It would
Right.
be like the coolest chessboard for Bobby Fischer, but it's it's an old school football team and it's resistant to change and apparently angrily at times, or reportedly angry at times. So I don't know, especially with the way D. Filippo was treated um,
Mm-hmm.
and other things like, you know, Norv Turner, quote unquote, retired halfway through his season and then unretired instantly, got another job. He's never done that before. It just feels like, 50% of the time it's worked out.
Well,
People are,
there was some issues there between him and the head coach at the time
and
that happened.
I respected him for saying, the Air Coryell offense requires, a big running back, big pass catching tight end. You know, like I don't have those pieces. Essentially, he didn't have everything he needed to be effective. Was what he said. But I also think he would have, otherwise wrote out that season if not for some sort of animus. But I'm speculating there.
Yeah.
50% of the time it's worked out. Pat Shermer was good. He got a head coaching job that didn't end up working out for him. But um,
Well, here's why I mentioned Lynn.
Stefanski is the one that got away. Everyone's saying, but Yeah,
Well, it looks like that right now, and who knows how long that will last because we have to wait and see that out a little bit longer. But the reason I like Lynn is because I'm sick and tired of getting the offensive coordinator who's just a stepping stone away from the next
yeah.
head coach
That's
job.
the other.
How many
That's the double-edged sword then,
how
right?
many times has that happened? Pat Shermer, Kevin Stefanski. I mean, that's what we thought was going to happen with DiFilippo, but unfortunately, it failed miserably for him on that regard. But Lynn is a guy who just had that opportunity, and it's probably not looking to get back there just yet. And maybe we could get a couple of years out of him. And he's familiar with. He had spent time with Kubiak, so he knows the system. And you know,
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know if these other guys, Kubiak's kid or Dennison would be happy, of them plucking a Lynn and putting them in on top of them. But to be honest, I frankly don't care if he's the guy for the job. Get him in here because I think he's the guy who needs to go and lick his head coaching wounds for a little while before he says, and put another nice, a season or two on his resume to before he gets plucked for an HC job. So and that's what I want this time. I'm sick. I'm so sick and tired of the Vikings having the next good player and then the next good head coaching prospect, and he's gone. I mean,
yeah.
yes, Stefanski would look good here right now, I believe, but would he ever look great under Zimmer's regime? I don't know. I mean, he was good here last year. Some of us thought it was a lot to do with uh, Kubiak. I think Stefanski's proving this year that it wasn't,
Yeah.
and um, so I don't know.
We are spoiled with coordinators if you think about it. I mean, Tony Dungy,
Good
Mike
point.
Tomlin, Bill Belich, not Bill Belichick, Brian Billick.
Brian
Um,
Bill. Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
true.
who was the mastermind of the '98 offense, and all of a sudden became the head coach of arguably the best defense of all time, which was very strange.
And won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, that seems to be the
Yeah,
case.
Tomlin won a Super Bowl. Dungy won a Super Bowl. And for a while I was getting mad about us losing all the defensive coordinators. Now it's offensive coordinators that can't hang on to. But
Yeah, and I've long made the argument that I think that at its peak of what Zimmer wants to do with his defense, it hasn't proven itself to be like that Ravens or anywhere near that Ravens, elite enough to win a championship. It needs an elite offense on the other side of the ball, and I think
it
that,
does. Yeah.
they could be a little less risk averse. Cousins is a pretty accurate quarterback. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot outside of, those weird, first quarters to his season the last 2 years.
What was it? Wasn't the 2012 or when was the year that they went to the NFC Championship? Minneapolis Miracle. That defense was pretty
Tw-
damn good, wasn't it?
2017, yeah,
Yeah.
they were historically good
Yeah.
on third down, but
But they didn't have the offense.
yeah, well, and two, I rewatched that Eagles game because it in my head my memory of that game is completely different. Like I felt like we had those two drives. The first one was a touchdown. The second one was in the red zone. Then there was the
Fumble.
turnover. Yep.
Yep. Two
And then
turnovers in the next two drives. Yeah.
and then in my mind the game was over at that point. But it, they hung around a lot longer than my memory served. It was only in the second half when they started just being completely wide open down the field, and Harrison Smith was like
Right.
throwing his arms up and stuff. Um, but I feel like that really Zimmer's defense hasn't been the same since the second quarter of that Saints game that year.
Right.
And I don't know what that is. There was 2018. He came out and said, you know what, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but the Eagles kind of broke my brain, and I tried to create this perfect defense, but it was too complicated. There's too many variables, and guys are thinking and not playing. So he, after the first four games, he kind of dialed it back. At this point, he gets a pass for inexperience and injury. But I think he can put together a good defense. I think he's incredibly good. I think his best trait as a head coach or entity is his ability to identify, draft and develop players for his defense. I
Mm-hmm.
think,
Yeah.
especially in the first couple rounds, he's had an incredible hit rate. And
Sounds like a coordinator, doesn't it?
hey, glorified offensive coordinator. That should be in our merch store at some point. But yeah, I mean, you also have to wonder like how. you know, how, do we think Zimmer's going to come up with something new to change what we've seen? You know, making the playoffs every other year and then getting embarrassed in said playoffs. Uh, you know, what about that makes people?
Phenomenal that that streak keeps going every other
It
year.
would be kind of cool, you
And
know.
I'm such an idiot. I even bet on him this year to be have a good season. I'm a dumbass. Next year you got to go all in, and then the year after they're gonna lose.
Yeah,
So
we need time for like a breather, you know, like uh, going into like a really hot sauna, then going into the ice cold pool.
well
Um,
they have the Super Bowl hangover without ever getting to the Super Bowl.
yeah, uh, yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to talk myself out of being really despondent because it's like the last thing I think we really needed was, you know, more change at the offensive coordinator position when that was the sole positive on this team. If you're looking at the defense, there were some flashes of young guys developing. I get that, but especially the way they handled those last couple games, they it's like their heart wasn't in it. Just you know, historically bad against the Saints. They fired Marwan Malouf, the special teams coach. No big surprise there. The special teams were atrocious. So everyone's pointing to the offense as the thing, and
Now
now
we're gonna lose the
Kubiak's
OC.
gone.
I know
So
that's terrible. That's the Vikings way. Apparently,
it's just like if it's
get
not,
good and then get yourself gone.
yeah, if it's not one thing, it's definitely a number. Um, yeah, it's just been a really good or at least a fun season. It hasn't been good, but it's just been everything, you know, up and down. It wasn't mediocre. The record shows that, but you know, there's a couple other things I wanted to get to with the few minutes that we have remaining on the show. Uh, you know, this is a question I wanted to ask um, Coach Tice because he's sent out a tweet yesterday essentially saying that the way that the NFL votes for Hall of Fame players needs to change. It should be former players and or coaches, not just. I was amazed, and I put this in my article. I said I did not know this, but I didn't know it was one guy per market. I don't know how they determine what a big market is, if it's the top whatever. But Sansevier, who writes a column for Vikings Territory, or Bob Sansevier, obviously, for us on Vikings Territory each week, I co-host his show, the BS Show, every Tuesday. Or actually, I'm moving to Mondays now. But yeah, he had a really great story about the one year that he got to basically fill in back in the day, and just the experience of seeing all these, especially back then, old school like sports reporters, you know, with
Mm-hmm.
smoking cigarettes and cigars, and it's a very insular system. It sounds like, and there's a lot of politics involved, and you know, I as a guy who has way more experience in the traditional credible media. What was your take on the idea of changing that? I know you're friends with the guy who gets the vote in for us.
Mark Craig from the Star Tribune. Yeah, he is a good friend of mine, and I talk about him with him often, especially when there's a Viking in there that he has to put up. I mean, for many years it was Sid doing it, and Sid Hartman was notorious for going to the meetings and basically screaming at him for not having Jim Marshall in there or whoever else he wanted to get in. And Mark Craig has a completely different man. He's pretty more reserved and kind of your low key guy who's got the chops and knows what he's talking about. But they'll go up there and they'll present him and they'll present the case to all the voters uh, for to why this guy should be in the Hall of Fame, why you should get him his vote. And I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet. I wanted to ask if he's involved with Jared Allen. I mean, Jared Allen spent a number of years with Kansas City, so I don't know if it's coming out of there, if it's coming out here. But so I have not been able to ask him that question yet because somebody is promoting him. I mean, Mark did a lot of work with Chris Carter because Chris Carter took forever to get in. Chris is from Ohio, and
That's
Mark is from
that is very strange.
yeah, and Mark is from Cleveland and lived in Canton, Ohio, for a number of years, writing for a newspaper there, and so he knows Carter intimately, and you know, it was just interesting to hear about that process and such. But so you know, if you're you know, I would really be curious to see what Mike Tice thinks about this. Mike, you want to handle? Oh, he's not. Um, I I kind of like the way it is now. Kind of. You know, Hall of Fame players, and it becomes kind of like the Oscars. You know.
Weird. That's the analogy I made in my article. Like anyone that's ever been nominated becomes part of
Yeah,
the Academy.
and I don't know how much, and they can vote on any film, on any aspect of any film, when they don't even know much about those aspects of those films. I mean, you might get a Hall of Fame right tackle who who's voting on whether a safety is going to should be in the Hall of Fame or not, and how much do they know about that position? I don't know. Um, I
That's a
think
really good question because I
the
mean,
writers, yeah, they spend all their time observing and analyzing, and I'd hate it to be a popularity contest, which you could get into with players, and the media is supposed to be partial, or I mean, I'm sorry, unbiased and impartial, and I don't know if that changes. I mean, I've heard when I hear them talk about how the players vote for Pro Bowls. I mean,
yeah,
it's laughable. Some of these guys they don't even know. So I haven't watched him all year, and then
yeah.
someone will be sitting next to him in the locker room and say, "Well, mark his name down. He had a good year," and telling him it's like, I guess I wouldn't want it to be that. I wouldn't want
Yeah.
it to be that.
No, I see what you're saying, and I mean, you nailed it. The way Sansevier explained it in one of his articles was that it's a travesty that Chuck Foreman hasn't made it to the Hall of Fame, and Foreman's quote essentially was that if you don't have a team pushing for you, you're not going to make it, and no one's pushing for me. Um,
Hmm.
I think you can't eliminate that, even if you add, the other problem is, this is the biggest league in terms of teams, in terms of the size of teams, the turnover rates. Yeah, eventually you would have, 1.2 billion different people voting, and yeah, that it becomes much more complex. I also, unless there's some sort of moral quandary with it, I kind of am a sucker for tradition. As I get older, I don't know, why. I don't like teams moving from different markets. I don't like. Uh, I miss Tampa Bay being in the NFC Central. Remember those days?
Yeah, yeah.
It made no sense, but it was great.
You're only a couple of years from yelling, "Get off my lawn!"
Well, if I had a lawn, I would do it. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we uh, didn't even get the chance to touch on today, which is kind of cool. So we'll be back next week, hopefully with Coach Tice to cover some other things. But I know that we uh, every year, for those that are uninitiated, Joe and I predict the outcome of a Vikings game by obviously winner and score. We don't keep track of wins or losses that way, but then basically says, okay, Joe Johnson, being me, said the Vikings would win 50-3. They actually won 24-21. What's the point differential versus your point differential? And I've never really come close to beating you at this, even when I had your Wednesday game preview articles in front of me. I had no Price is Right strategy, so on and so forth. But I think this year was closer than I think the gap is closing.
A little bit, yeah, yeah. I mean, you started out hotter than a pistol, but I came roaring back, and last week coming into this final game, I had a 46-point lead, and we both underestimated greatly. I mean, you went 24-17, I went 27-20, and it ended up being 37-35. So I picked up 5 points or six
Uh,
points and ended up the season with a 42-point differential. It's
you know
it's
what's
it's
annoying?
hmm,
I did the score preview article Saturday night, and I had time to reflect, and I chose the Vikings to lose 38-34,
wow,
which would have been kind of close. And then I conflated the two
yeah.
numbers, so I thought maybe I did something amazing, and this was going to be the best end of the show ever. But it's better than I think last year, the year before. At one point, there was a double or a triple digit
Yes, there
margin.
was, but yeah, you're
Not
you're
my
you're
finest
doing
moment.
better.
That you got I'm still waiting for Mobo to develop. Just give him a couple more spins on the practice squad, and
Yeah, that
that take
and
will
and
end up
that
aging better.
and that title that I just got with $1.25 will get me a cup of coffee. So there you go.
Yeah, I don't know where. I probably wouldn't drink that coffee, but I wanted to thank everybody for tuning into the show. You can follow Joe on Twitter at Joe Oberle. That's OBERLE. You can follow me at VTPTSD, like Vikings Territory PTSD. Obviously, find our stuff on VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com. We just hired a familiar face to many of you, Mr. Tim McNiff, the former number one sportscaster in the local market for Care 11. He is going to be helping essentially our company grow, do some really professional level video stuff, build a newsroom, get exclusives, so on and so forth. So we're really excited for that. I want everyone to stay tuned for 2021 because we have a lot of cool stuff going on. But none of that would be possible if not for Mr. Joe Oberle, who's been by my side longer than anybody. Um, it's probably not good for your health, but at least it's fun while we get to do it.
I absolutely love doing this every week. That's for sure.
Yeah, so hopefully people love listening to it. We'll be back next week to discuss all the Vikings news, looking at free agency, cap space, so on and so forth. Other ways that I was right during the season, and so we'll catch everyone next Wednesday, 7 p.m. on KDLM Radio Detroit Lakes. Skol.